inches, or?
Probably, but it's
Around the belly.
equal the pounds. All right. Ready when you're ready. Ready, set, go. Okay. So the Mini Best is a test that I was using when I was up at an outpatient neuro facility in Washington, and it came out in 2010 as the best test, which was, let's see here, 36 items and took about 45 minutes to administer, which is why they came up with the shortened version of it, which is only takes about 15 minutes to administer, and it assesses things like gait and sensory, protective postural responses, anticipatory postural responses, like what is your body going to do when you go to get up. But overall, they found that the Mini Best test was highly correlated with the Best test in terms of assessing fall risk in patients with Parkinson's, as well as other neurological disorders, strength deficits, all of those. But they've done the most studies with Parkinson's disease, which, since we have a high population of that here, I thought it was a good test to kind of show you guys. This little handout kind of walks you through the different studies that I chose to kind of write about here. But so let's see here. The two categories that got eliminated when they did the Mini Best test were biomechanical restraints and stability limits. So basically, biomechanical constraints were like, what does their ankle move like? What kind of hip mobility do they have? And then the stability limits was reaching activities, so like your functional reach test or lateral reaching kind of activities. They basically eliminated those because they showed it didn't really test the dynamic ability, and it was correlated with other tests they were already doing. So that's why they kind of dropped those tests already. And then from that point on, they were able to eliminate 24 items were filtered out based on if they were redundant or correlated. So that's how they kind of really shortened the form, because they're like, these tests basically show the same thing or show the same correlation, so we don't need to do all of them. And they broke the scoring down to just a 3-point system because it's been shown to be just as responsive as a 4 or 5-point scale. So then when you compare the Mini Best to like the Berg, which is everyone's like standard for balance kind of assessments, it was shown to be just as reliable. It had a lesser ceiling effect at post like evaluations. So in the beginning, there were no floor or ceiling effects for either of the tests. When they did I show the study on here, but I think they had like 115 patients that they did like the Berg and the Mini Best on all of them. And then they treated them for 10 sessions of PT working on balance training. And then they asked the PT who was treating them as well as the patient how much change they thought they had, from -7 being they got worse to +7 being like they're at the max kind of balance they could have, and 0 was no change. And so it was shown that the scores with the Mini Best were correlated with those global rated perceived changes that the patients and therapists thought the patients actually had. So at the beginning, when they tested the patients, there were no floor or ceiling effects found for either the Berg or the Mini Best. But then after treatment, there was a ceiling effect in the Berg of 12.9% versus only 2.1% in the Mini Best. So basically, they were finding that when you test people with the Berg the second time around, it'll show that they've kind of maxed out on how much improvement they can have, versus when you do the Mini Best test, it showed 10% less of the people maxing out. So showing that there's still room for improvement to be made with the testing, which I think is great when we're wanting to continue keeping people in show, but still showing they're making gains.
And you get a lot of people that score 56 on the Berg, and you know that they're
and you can
not
see, you can
perfect.
tell, but you're like, the Berg's not showing. Yeah, the Berg's not showing what they are. I tend to think of the Berg as a little bit lower level when I'm testing people for their balance skills. The inner rater reliability was similar between the two tests, and the validity was good, as I already kind of talked about there. Your standard error of measurement is just like 1.2 points for the Mini Best and about 2.8 for the Berg. The Mini Best test was better able to show like a clinically important difference of 4 points versus the Berg. It takes 7 points to really know that you've had a difference. So it's a little bit more responsive of a test. Let's see here. Okay, and then I just put a little section in there, since we do work with so many people with Parkinson's disease. I put a little section in there about the the sensitivity and specificity of the mini best and the Berg and assessing fall risk at 6 months post their score. So if they score less or equal than a 20 out of 32 points, that means they're likely to have a fall in the next 6 months. But with both the Berg and the mini best, at 12-month follow-up, they weren't shown to have like a high correlation of if someone would fall or not. So it's just more for the next 6 months. And then I put a couple treatment ideas on here for different balance things just to go over. The reason I love the mini best test is basically because it has protective postural responses on there, which a lot of other balance tests I've done in the past, I haven't seen this on any of those tests. So you're basically checking a patient's limits in terms of they're able to lean sideways, backwards, forwards, and then what they do in response to losing their balance. How many steps do they take? Can they recover easily? And then my biggest pet peeve of the mini best is it can kind of be hard sometimes. You can see that your patients are making changes, but because it's a 3-point scale, sometimes those changes that you're seeing, you don't actually like correlate to the test. So like someone who say they can only stand on a leg for 2 seconds, and all of a sudden they can get to 10 seconds, they still don't move up in the mini best in that section. So to me that's kind of frustrating when you're actually seeing these gains that aren't high enough yet to correlate in those sections. And we don't have this availability here, but in the neuro clinic I was working at, they had a body weight support system. So you could put someone on the treadmill and have them walking at a decline on the treadmill and at an incline going backwards, forward, side to side, having them switch directions. So it really helped with those protective postural responses. We saw huge gains in people after working them on the treadmill like that, just in their ability to catch themselves if they lost their balance. And so overall I like this test because it's not just, the Berg tends to be a little bit more static stuff, up and down, and then you have like something like your dynamic gait or your functional gait where it's just walking oriented really. So this adds that sensory component, the walking component, those protective responses, as well as your general responses to, okay, my body knows I'm going to get up and stand, but can it react appropriately to feed forward and get myself ready to do those things without losing my balance. So I was just going to quickly run you guys through then what the different tests on here are. And when I printed out this mini best test, it's a different version than the one I printed out most recently. But they're only scoring you out of 28 points on this. So there's two items on here where you're doing your right and your left leg, or your right and your left lateral lean, and they only score the best out of the two, or the worst out of the two, sorry. Whereas before you were scoring each of them separately. So I don't know how that would correlate then with that 20 out of 32 points, because now on this one they're saying you only scored up to 28 points. But in general, if someone wants to use an assistive device for this test, they can. So they can use a cane or a walker if they need to, but it automatically scores them one section down of what they would have been. But if they need your assistance in any portion of it to like maintain their balance, then of course they get a 0. So the first one you have is from a chair, like we have without armrests, and you're just seeing, okay, when they go to sit to stand, can they do it without using their hands? If they can and safely, then they get a 2. If they need to use their hands or their legs hit the back of a chair, that's automatically a 1, as long as they keep their balance when they get up. And then if it takes them more than several attempts to get up, if they get a 0. To rise up on your toes, that one is you just have them about shoulder width apart, and they're coming up as high as they can on their toes, and then you're counting out loud for 3 for them. Can they maintain their balance? 1, 2, 3. And then you have to test to make sure they're up as high as they can, that when they're holding on to something that they can't go higher. Because that's what I've noticed a lot with patients is they might be able to hold it and they're maybe a little shaky, but then if you give them something, they can go up about 2 inches higher. So that would mean that they don't have the good balance there. They'd get at least a 1 on that one. Then you have your normal single leg stance time. And you just want them to just pick the leg up from the back, not let it rest on the other leg, not let the toe touch, just all those general things that you're looking for. And the test is always talking about having their hands on their hips, because you guys all know if you tell someone to do single leg stance, they're like doing one of these things, and so they really want them not to be using those extra kind of balance checks. They want it really close, narrow, checking out that. Okay, and then Roger, can I use you as our demonstration person? So these are the protective postural responses that the test uses that I like. So there's a forward, a backwards, and then side to side. So if Roger's our patient, I'm going to have you face that direction. Feet together for me. Good. I'm going to put one hand at his shoulder and one hand at his hip. And I'm going to ask him to lean back into me to the point where I know if I let go, he's going to...
Trust fall.
Good. Yeah, it's a trust fall. So I'm here and I say, okay, lean back. Come on, push into me.
Oh, push into it.
So right there, Roger would actually score a 1 because it took him more than.
I didn't know.
It took him more than. Basically, they get a 2 if they can just take that 1 step back and catch
If
themselves.
you do it again, I can take 0.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't want you to know what I was doing to best test it. So they can take 1 step back, and they can even take a realignment step like this. But if it takes more than 1 or 2 for them to catch their balance, that gives them automatically a 1. You're always got your hands there to catch them because if they can't catch their balance, it's a 0. Like they're going to fall if you're not there. And I've definitely had patients who just keep on going. So that's the biggest thing there. Then you do forward, so he turns around and faces me. Same thing again, 1 hand at the shoulder, 1 hand at the hip. I think in the testing they tell you to do it at their shoulders, but I've noticed with patients like that, then they do this, and you can't get them to bring their hips forward. So I like to put 1 hand at each so they're pushing into you.
So lean forward.
Yep, so lean forward into me. Come on, push at your hip. There you go. So good. Roger gets a 2 on that one. Because we were all worried. Okay, then the lateral one is the hardest of these to do because patients don't want to let go. Their feet need to be together on this one so they more get that tip. With this one, if they take a crossover step, that's fine, and then they can again realign, or if they just take a step out. But anything that's more than those 2 steps is considered less than 2. So go ahead and push into me. So that's appropriate, that's a 2. And then you just switch it and do the other side. So that's the new thing with the mini best, which is why I really like the test, because it shows those responses there.
I assume they get a 0 if they can't assume the feet together position.
Yeah, I've had a lot of patients who you're trying, you're like, come on, they can maybe get here, but they won't lean. And so then you just have to, they don't trust you enough to let you do the test, so you just have to give them a 0 automatically.
And to get the feet in the position, can they hold on, or they have to do it without holding?
Can they hold on to what here? No, they need to just be here. So they're not holding on to anything, they're just leaning into you.
Even to assume that position?
Yes. Yeah. There is one test when they're getting up on the foam, so we're going to do all the sensory stuff next. So the first one's feet together, eyes open. Can they stand there? I think it's 30 seconds, if that's what it says. Yeah, 30 seconds with their eyes open. The second one is, we don't have what the test recommends, so this is what I would use for now if you guys are using it, but just one of these foam pads. And with this one, when I've done the research, because it doesn't say directly on that, but when I've looked it up in different studies, it says that they can use support to get up onto the foam, because if they're just getting up with the foam without it, they don't really, they might fall just doing that. So they can use support to get up and put their feet together here. And then you tell them, okay, close their eyes, and is this one 30 seconds too, or just 15?
Yes.
So again, 30 seconds. Do they need to catch someone for their balance? And if at any time they grab you and reach out, then that means a 0 or the timing stops, or whatever the time recommendations are. So you can help them here at this one to get up onto the foam. You can also help them to get up onto like a 15-degree incline, which we don't really have here. So I wouldn't use this with your patients. I don't know if I just skip this test right now, or use like those blocks, because I don't know if I'd really trust either of those to be stable enough for them to do this.
Can we use a wedge to wedge it?
Would that
Would that work?
Oh, I suppose that might work.